The media's influence in education of young people in the Middle East especially plays a crucial role in the peace process. Itamar Marcus is the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch, an Israeli organization that monitors the Palestinian media. Ziad Asali joins me from Washington. He is the president and founder of the American Task Force on Palestine. I am pleased to welcome both of them to this broadcast and to have a dialogue about what is, in fact, crucial. Tom Friedman, in a New York Times piece, said the following. This was January 18th, 04. The explosion of Arab multimedia from Al Jazeera to the internet. What's happening is that this Arab media explosion is feeding the images of this Israeli-Palestinian violence to this Arab population explosion, radicalizing it and melding in the heads of young Arabs and Muslims the notion that the biggest threat to the future is JIA, Jews, Israel, and America. That speaks to a different point, but in some ways a similar point about the power of media, and we want to talk about that and different views on that. Tell me how you came to this and what your point is, Mr. Marcus.
Well, Palestinian Media Watch was formed about 6 years ago to get an understanding of what the Palestinians were saying amongst themselves in Arabic. And very quickly we found that there were two distinct worlds. There was the English language world, which was for media consumption, and there was the Arabic language world, which was completely different. And we were following especially what was being said to children, how children were being educated, because we feel that for long-term peace, it's more important to know what a third-grade teacher is telling her students than what Yasser Arafat is telling George Bush. Because ultimately, that's going to make the difference of how the next generation relates to Israel as neighbors or not.
And what, in your judgment, are they saying to the children in Palestinian areas?
We have found a consistent message that the conflict with Israel is not a border conflict. The conflict with Israel, the children are taught, the adults are taught, is an existential conflict against two targets. One, against individual Jews who are constantly portrayed as evil, conniving, cunning, as inherently evil. And the second thing is that Israel is delegitimized in its creation, not with relation to what's called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but in its creation, Israel is delegitimized as an existing state. So the children are taught that the conflict with Israel is existential against Jews and against Israel as a state.
And what are Israeli children taught about Palestinian issues, Palestinian people, Palestinian objectives?
Israeli children are actually taught diametrically opposed messages. There is very active peace education in Israeli schools and Israeli society. I'll just give you one example of beautiful peace education in an Israeli school book. There's a story in, I think it's a third-grade book, of an Israeli boy who's at the water and he falls into the water and he's drowning. And he can't get out of the water. And he assumes he's going to die, and then all of a sudden a rowboat comes along with an Arab in it. The Arab's wearing a keffiyeh, and then you have this illustration of an Arab with a keffiyeh bending in the water and saving this Israeli child. Now that's beautiful peace education. It's telling the Israeli child, Arabs are good, and if you're in trouble, the Arab's actually going to save your life.
So all of the Israeli media, most of it, I mean obviously you can't say 100%, but most of the Israeli media you find is not showing in any way insensitive, disrespectful, erroneous about Palestinians and Palestinian objectives.
That is correct.
And what they're teaching children.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually studied over 400 Israeli school books, and every little example of slight stereotyping we publicized said these should be corrected. This is after we studied the Palestinian school books and found horrific hatred of Jews, hatred of Israel, calls for Israel's destruction. Jews defined as treacherous and evil, the enemies of God, the enemies of the prophets. This was Palestinian school books. The Israeli school books are completely the opposite, that in spite of the conflict, we're educating to see the Arabs as our potential neighbors. I'll just point out one further example. The Palestinian media has been, to children, not so much specifically this, but has been calling for the extermination of Jews, essentially, over the last few years by numerous religious leaders who've explicitly said, kill the Jews wherever you find them, have no mercy in your heart. They've also indicated that this is what Islam is indicating, is demanding of them in many sources, in many occasions on Palestinian television. This is to the extent that the incitement has gone, literally calling for the murder of Jews as something that God wants of them. Israelis, on the other side, just as a way of comparison, there was a young woman named Tatiana Suskind who who, after a suicide bombing in Israel, was incensed and drew a picture of a picture of what she called Muhammad, a pig, and the Quran on a piece of paper, and started distributing this in the streets of Israel. This was brought to the press's attention, an outrage, and it was publicized. The woman was arrested, charged under Israel's anti-incitement laws, and actually was convicted and sat a year in jail for insulting another religion. So Israel abhors an inciter against an Arab because he's an Arab, and the Palestinian society and the media has been promoting it as Palestinian Authority policy.
All right, let me go to Ziad Asali. He is a physician. He is he's the president and the founder of the American Task Force on Palestine, and he joins us from Washington. He and Mr. Marcus testified before the Education Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee in the United States Congress. You just heard what Mr. Marcus said. Tell me how you see this.
Well, as someone who is pretty much dedicating all my energies and organizationally and personally to pursue a peaceful solution with two-state solutions side by side, living in peace and giving hope for the future generations, I find it rather distressing to listen to such an incredibly one-sided portrayal of two societies, two communities, and their educational systems. It is unquestionably true that there are bad apples on every side, and statements and pictures and all kinds of unpleasant things exist on the Palestinian and Israeli side, and it is in our own fundamental interest, if we are serious about peace, to not overplay the negative and damaging images and gloss over all the positive attempts of reconstructing a future for the children. I know that the Palestinian curricula have been reviewed under the supervision of the Europeans, and this has been going on since 1994. Most of this stuff that have been mentioned, of course, were applied to the area prior to 1994 when the Palestinians moved in after the Oslo Agreement and then started their work on education. Prior to that, the kids were educated under Jordanian textbooks, and everything that was mentioned now applies to the area before the Palestinians even took command. And Professor Nathan Brown, who is a good, solid professor at George Washington University, has reviewed this work extensively. I happen to know him, have a great respect for him, and he indicated in writing and did the most credible work on this subject and said that the new curricula seem to be acceptable and do a good foundation for the peace.
Mr. Marcus.
If I could respond, the comments that I'm talking about and the quotes, the things I was citing were not from the past. And just to go on, I mean, the quotes about calling for the destruction and murder of Jews, these are things on Palestinian television happening over the last couple of years and have nothing to do with Jordanian school books. And this has been a backbone, not only to adults, but children have been taught through the last 3 years, through music videos on Palestinian television, to aspire death for Allah, to aspire the Shahada. I mean, just give you one example. There was a music video that was probably on PATV 500 times. So this is not taking something... PATV, Palestinian Authority official television.
Right.
Now, on this music video, which again, 500 times directed at children, a young boy, probably 14 years old, writes a farewell letter to his parents, and then he goes off hoping to die in the conflict. And the words of his letter, which are sung to us by a popular singer, include the words, "How sweet is martyrdom," as he's falling to the ground having achieved the Shahada. How sweet is martyrdom. He falls to the ground dead. He turns to his mother in the letter, "Mother, be joyous over my blood." We have found numerous music videos where Palestinian children are told that Shahada is sweet. We have had children on television saying, 11-year-old girls saying on television that they want to die for Allah because the afterlife is so wonderful and that Shahada is sweet. And let me just give you one more example. There's a story of a 14-year-old boy named Faras Uda who, according to the official Palestinian daily, went out hoping to die. He prepared a memorial for himself in the corner of his room with his picture and a wreath around it. And as he left the house, he said to his mother, "Don't worry, mother, Shahada is sweet." He went out, put himself in the front lines, hoping to die, was hit in some crossfire. No one knows which bullet did it. The point is, this boy had been so convinced by today's Palestinian media, by the thousands of hours of convincing children that they should be dying for Allah as shaheeds, he went out and succeeded in doing this. And because of this, he was turned into a Palestinian Authority hero on Palestinian television.
Dr. Asali?
Yes. There is no denying at all that there are people who are committing suicide as they inflict damage on others. This is what we call suicide bombings. They have motivations. They have their own sense of what it is that they're doing in this life. I condemn them myself and my organization with no equivocation. However, I want to say that detaching the daily life, the context, the contextual life under occupation, and blaming the whole thing on media is an unacceptable simplification, unfortunately. These people live with an abhorrent reality. They live under house arrest quite often. They have to deal with checkpoints, and they have to deal with bombs coming from the sky and from tanks. They have to deal with daily humiliation, deprivation, malnutrition, and school closures, city closures. These are realities. These are realities that elicit reactions from these young men and women. And part of the impact is of education, but it's hardly the whole story.
If I may just comment on that, I feel tremendous sympathy for the Palestinians who have to wait at checkpoints and for the difficult conditions that the Palestinians have today in the cities. However, we must ask who is ultimately responsible for these checkpoints and who's responsible for the suffering. Before there was terrorism, there wasn't a checkpoint. Before there was terrorism, everything in the economic situation of the Palestinians was flourishing. In fact, under Israel, before the Oslo Accords, under Israel, the Palestinian areas, that is the West Bank, had one of the fastest growing economies in the world under Israel. In the 70s, for example, the the West Bank economy grew at 10% a year, was the fourth fastest growing economy in the world, and this was under Israel. When Israel got the West Bank administration in '67, there were no universities. When Israel gave it over, there were 7 universities. All of the good things that people want for Palestinians are exactly what Israelis have wanted for Palestinians, with one difference. The rest of the world has talked about it, and Israel has done these things. Israel did everything to improve the lives of these people because we wanted them to be neighbors, to live with us in peace. When the Palestinian Authority was established in 1993, they are the ones who turned the situation around. They're the ones who encouraged the terrorism, fighting the peace process in Arabic, and they are the ones who brought the checkpoints. They're the ones who brought all of this suffering on their people. So yes, I sympathize with the suffering of the Palestinian children and their people, but who is responsible? Not Israel, only the Palestinian leadership.
Well, if I may say so, Palestinians are living under occupation. Remove the occupations and there will be no suicide bombings. I mean, if you want to simplify things to their maximum and simplistic formation. But let us be serious. People who live under occupation would want one thing above all. They want liberty. And, it is not altogether shocking for someone to say, give me liberty or give me death. People do want to be free. The Palestinians have lived under occupation, the longest-standing occupation of our present times. Now, since 1967, they want to be free people. And if you give them freedom, the challenge for reasonable people on a show like this should be this: how do we actually, collectively and together, try and make these people live separately, independently, in freedom, so that they have normal relations with each other, rather than that to say it's the Israeli fault or the Palestinian fault. That's easy. That's much too easy to feel a victim yourself, to be victimized and have a monopoly on victimization, if you will, and then the other guy, his grievance, his suffering, etc., is only a theoretical consideration for you. No, we want to build societies, new relations, for a state of Palestine, independent, viable, alongside Israel. That is how we should be spending our energies, rather than blaming each other.
If in fact, the kind of images that are being presented, if in fact, that he has put together in a documentary that they have done called Ask for Death, and then a new documentary, I suspect, that's called The Making of a Child Warrior, probably the same theme on those two, I would assume.
Yes.
These two documentaries are reflective of the kind of media the kind of portrayal that young Arab children are seeing, is that helpful in the process to achieve the objectives that you just so eloquently outlined?
Okay, it is completely not productive to that. But let us talk
and so
statistics
therefore,
a little
both
bit.
sides should make sure that kind of
Absolutely.
that kind of inciting material,
Yes,
not in
sternly.
textbooks, not on the media,
Yes, everywhere. Yes, and may I just ask about generalizations here? So I'm sure somebody, if they spend 6 years of their lives trying to compile things, they would find things like that, and they might even embellish them. I don't know, but if you take clips from the Jerry Springer show and show it in New Zealand about the American TV, then you would give them an incredibly distorted picture of American TV also. We have to be careful with the selective process here. I personally read the Palestinian press every day. I read other press in the region, and I don't see a thing, absolutely nothing, to suggest this in the print media. I don't live there, and I don't see what they have on TV, but I assume they have several TV stations and have several things. Dwelling on the complete negative stereotype of the other and demonizing him is completely unacceptable, whether by shows that are actually on TV or by commentary about what is happening in real life. Yeah. We have to live in the gray area. It's not black and white.
Okay, I think it's very important to understand that the items that we are showing and that we are documenting in these reports are not taken, these are not exceptions that appeared once over a period of years. When I tell you that that clip encouraging young children to shahada was on 500-600 times over a period of 2 years, it was sometimes on 2 and 3 times a day. This was the backbone of Palestinian television. When you say, for example, that you think the print media is fine, let me just tell you about an item or two that appeared in the last 2 days in the Palestinian print media. There was a discussion between two Palestinians. I forget the exact names now, because but one of them was talking about Israel exchanging one Israeli captive for 400 terrorists, mostly from the Hezbollah, with the Hezbollah. And the other one responded and explained that Israel does this intentionally because it's trying to tell the world that the value of a Jew is worth more than the value of an Arab, and that even one Jew is worth 1,000 Arabs. And the other one responded and said, oh yes, this is found in the protocols of the elders of Zion, and this is their ideology. This was yesterday, 2 days ago on Palestinian television.
But let me ask you this. I mean, you're not suggesting that in the Israeli press, you won't find things that Palestinians would take great offense at, whether it is what somebody said, not talking about necessarily the editorial policy of a particular publication. I mean, there's some things that in certain Israeli publications, the government takes great, the Sharon government takes great exception to. But clearly in newspapers, on television programs like this and others, people say things that other people violently disagree with. Doesn't that happen in Israeli press as well?
It's true. The Israeli press is a completely democratic press. And
therefore people say things that are offensive to Palestinians.
Right, but the Palestinian press is not a democratic press. And Basamid, for example, who's a Palestinian, has written and described tens of cases of Palestinian journalists who were tortured because they didn't follow the official PA line, the official Palestinian Authority line. So that things that are appearing on Palestinian television, things that are appearing in their official newspaper are not things that can happen. You have to imagine a state like Iraq in terms of totalitarian control of the press. This is what the PA is. When they repeatedly, and a few weeks ago there were other references to the protocols of the elders of Zion, that these messages keep coming over and over again, that the official religious leaders on television have called repeatedly for the extermination of Jews. This is not just that person's opinion. This is something that the Palestinian Authority leadership, now I believe sincerely that Ziad in Washington wants to have a peaceful two-state solution, but he doesn't really represent what the Palestinian Authority leadership is telling to their people, and that's what we have a problem with.
I certainly do not represent the Palestinian Authority, although what Mr. Marcus is saying makes me want to defend what the position that they're in now. I mean, how can these people be like acting like such dictators while they have really no authority? They're decimated. Their authority has been decimated. They don't have a security apparatus, and they don't have a political establishment that's worthy of any respect over there. So how can they be imposing their will so deeply that nobody can dare publish or write anything against them? I read what is written against them in the Palestinian press every day, against the Palestinian Authority, with suggestions, serious suggestions for changes of leadership, for reform, for opening up elections, very serious, and accusations of corruption. All that stuff is all over the press in the Palestinian media. So I don't know what this dictatorship when the media is about. But anyway, I do not want to be drawn in again to get this, my position, your position. We must absolutely, responsibly defend that whatever is worth defending by human criteria that applies to all, and not our tribe against their tribe. This is what got us in this mess in the first place. We must transcend those things.
On that note, I must conclude. Thank you so much, Mr. Marcus. Thank
you.
Dr. Asali, thank you for joining us from Washington. Mr. Marcus
Thank
here
you very much.
In New York City. As I mentioned, there is a documentary called The Making of a Child Warrior, which is produced by his organization, and the other documentary that has been referred to is called Ask for Death, produced by Mr. Marcus. We'll be right back. Stay with us.